The emergency beacon pierced through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning, screaming across every radio frequency simultaneously. Military installations worldwide went silent as the transmission decoded itself into perfect English, somehow knowing exactly how to speak to humanity in their own tongue. Ambassador Kelvin materialized in the Pentagon's secure briefing room, his crystalline form shimmering like broken glass held together by starlight. The hologram flickered with exhaustion that transcended species barriers. General Rebecca Stone had seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers who'd witnessed too much death, but never in an alien whose very existence rewrote human understanding of a universe. The message was simple and terrifying. Something called the Devourers had awakened from a million-year sleep, and they were hungry. 12 entire star systems had vanished in 6 months, consumed down to their last atom and converted into raw materials for an ever-expanding mechanical swarm. Worlds that had supported billions of lives were now nothing more than empty space and drifting debris. Kelvin's people had intercepted Earth's radio and television broadcasts for decades, studying human culture through movies, books, and news reports. They'd analyzed every superhero story, every tale of good triumphing over evil, every narrative where brave heroes save the day through courage and moral conviction. Based on this research, they concluded that humans were natural-born champions of light, a species that produced heroes as naturally as trees produce leaves. They were asking for Earth's finest warriors, noble souls who would stand against the darkness with pure hearts and unwavering determination. They wanted Captain America, Superman, and Luke Skywalker rolled into one perfect package of heroic virtue. What they didn't understand was that Earth's greatest strength had never been its fictional heroes. Stone studied the hologram as it pleaded for salvation, noting how the alien's crystalline features caught the fluorescent light. Around the briefing table, Joint Chiefs and intelligence directors exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They understood something Kelvin's people clearly didn't grasp about human nature. Earth's real power had always come from its monsters, the humans who embraced darkness to protect what they loved. The presentation continued with tactical data that made Stone's blood run cold. The Devourers operated like a cosmic plague, breaking down matter at the molecular level and rebuilding it into more themselves. They possessed technology that made Earth's most advanced weapons look like stone axes. They'd faced 12 different alien civilizations, each with their own military traditions and combat philosophies, and none had even slowed them down. As the briefing concluded, Stone found herself thinking about humanity's actual military history, not the sanitized version that made it into Hollywood movies. She thought about Sherman's march through Georgia, about Dresden and Hiroshima, about the countless conflicts where victory came not through noble heroism, but through the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. The aliens wanted heroes, but Stone knew this wasn't a job for heroes. The room fell silent as Kelvin's hologram faded, leaving behind only the weight of cosmic responsibility. Stone looked around the table at faces she'd known for years, men and women who understood the true nature of warfare. They'd all read the classified reports, knew about the operations that never made the news, understood that sometimes protecting civilization meant becoming uncivilized yourself. Secretary of Defense Michael Hayes was the first to speak, his voice carrying the weight of decades in military intelligence. The conversation that followed would never appear in any official record, but would determine the fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. They weren't discussing how to send heroes to save the universe. They were planning how to unleash humanity's darkest capabilities on an enemy that had never faced anything like Earth's particular brand of warfare. The Devourers had consumed 12 civilizations that fought with honor, nobility, and respect for the rules of engagement. They were about to encounter the one species in the galaxy that treated those rules as optional suggestions, a species that had turned warfare into an art form of calculated brutality. The aliens were asking for heroes, but Earth was about to send something far more terrifying. As the meeting adjourned, Stone remained behind, staring at the now empty space where Kelvin's hologram had flickered. She understood the cosmic irony of the situation. Humanity was about to save the galaxy by proving they might be the next threat it needed saving from. The price of victory would be the knowledge that sometimes the line between hero and monster disappeared entirely, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The facility didn't officially exist. Built 300 feet beneath London's Thames barrier, it appeared on no government blueprints and consumed electricity through channels that trace back to shell companies within shell companies. The only entrance required biometric scans that cross-reference DNA, retinal patterns, and heartbeat signatures against a database so classified that even its existence was denied by every major intelligence agency. General Stone descended in the unmarked elevator alongside military commanders and intelligence chiefs from 17 nations. Each carried a dossier marked with classifications that went beyond top secret into realms that had no official terminology. These weren't personnel files. They were psychological profiles of humanity's most dangerous minds, individuals whose very existence was carefully managed to prevent them from destabilizing entire regions. The selection criteria violated every military recruitment protocol ever written. They weren't looking for the best soldiers or the brightest tacticians. They needed humans who understood that rules were limitations imposed by people who'd never face extinction. The kind of individuals who could stare into the abyss without blinking, who could make decisions that would haunt normal people for the rest of their lives. Colonel Jackson Phillips emerged from military records like a ghost story whispered in intelligence circles. His psychological warfare campaigns had broken enemy forces without firing a single shot, using techniques so effective they were immediately classified and buried. During conflict in Southeast Asia, entire enemy divisions had surrendered after being subjected to his methods for just 48 hours. The official reports credited superior firepower, but Phillips had won those battles by weaponizing human psychology itself. Dr. Victoria Cameron represented a different kind of monster entirely. Her background in biochemistry had led to developments that made traditional weapons look primitive by comparison. Working in laboratories that didn't appear on any university roster, she created biological agents that could target specific genetic markers, effectively making genocide as precise as surgery. Her research had been so successful that her own government had quietly imprisoned her, terrified of what she might create next. Commander William Reynolds brought expertise in cyber warfare that had redefined modern conflict. His division had once crashed an entire nation's infrastructure in under 6 hours, leaving millions without power, water, or communication, while their military networks turned against themselves. The operation had been so devastating that it was covered up and attributed to natural disasters, because admitting human capability for such destruction would have triggered global panic. The team expanded to include individuals whose identities were state secrets. Agent codenamed Ghost had been recruited at age 12 from a war zone where childhood ended with your first kill. Now 35, they possessed skills that made professional assassins look like amateurs. Their psychological profile made for disturbing reading. Someone who'd learned to compartmentalize emotion so completely that taking a life required no more mental effort than breathing. Dr. Rachel Foster represented the darkest corners of genetic research. Her weapons were so terrible that their very existence violated international treaties that didn't technically apply, because those treaties assumed no one would be insane enough to create such things. She'd been held in maximum security facilities for 8 years, not as punishment, but as protection for the rest of humanity. Her expertise would be invaluable against an enemy that existed at the intersection of biology and technology. Captain Brian Mitchell completed the roster with a military record that read like a horror novel. His methods had been effective beyond measure, but they'd crossed lines that existed for very good reasons. Official investigations had been buried because his results were too valuable to prosecute. He understood that winning wars sometimes required becoming the kind of person peacetime society couldn't tolerate. The briefing room felt like a gathering of apex predators, each individual representing a different facet of humanity's capacity for calculated brutality. These weren't soldiers who'd snap under pressure, or criminals who'd lost their moral compass. They were professionals who'd studied the art of warfare, and concluded that mercy was a luxury their enemies rarely afforded. As they reviewed the alien technology being provided, their planning sessions took on an almost clinical quality. They discussed tactics that would violate every galactic convention of warfare, strategies that would horrify their alien benefactors if they understood what humanity was truly capable of. The aliens believed they were arming noble warriors, but they were actually providing advanced weapons to the most dangerous humans who'd ever lived. The final preparations included psychological evaluations designed not to screen out dangerous individuals, but to ensure they could function effectively as a unit while maintaining operational security. Each team member signed documents that didn't just classify their mission, but effectively erased their civilian identities entirely. They would become instruments of humanity's survival, wielding capabilities that peaceful civilizations couldn't imagine. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Earth was about to save the galaxy by proving exactly why advanced civilizations should fear humanity's expansion into space. The human task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima System, where the remnants of 3 alien fleets hung in defensive formation around the dying world of Kepler Prime. What had once been a thriving planet with blue oceans and green continents was now a gray, scarred husk being systematically stripped of its atmosphere by mechanical swarms that moved like metallic locusts across its surface. Admiral Zeth of the combined fleet transmitted welcome messages filled with relief and hope. His people had been fighting for 6 months, watching their ships get torn apart by enemies that adapted to every tactic within hours. The arrival of Earth's heroes meant salvation was finally at hand. He expected coordination meetings, shared intelligence, and honorable combat according to galactic warfare conventions that had governed civilized conflict for thousands of years. Instead, the humans immediately began implementing tactics that made the alien commanders question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Within the first hour, Captain Mitchell's engineering teams had seeded the local asteroid field with nuclear devices disguised as space debris. Not the clean, precise explosives the aliens expected, but dirty bombs designed to spread radioactive material that would contaminate enemy salvage operations for decades. Commander Reynolds established communication intercept stations that didn't just monitor Devourer transmissions, but actively hijacked their networks. His cyber warfare specialists discovered that the mechanical minds operated on logic patterns that could be disrupted by feeding them paradoxical information. While alien hackers focused on breaking encryption, Reynolds was programming the enemy computers to question their own existence, creating digital nervous breakdowns in artificial minds. The psychological warfare campaign began when Colonel Phillips made direct contact with Devourer leadership through captured communication arrays. The aliens expected him to demand surrender or negotiate terms. Instead, Phillips transmitted detailed historical records of every war crime humanity had ever committed, presented as tactical innovations rather than moral failures. The mechanical minds, programmed to analyze optimal strategies, found themselves processing information that defied their understanding of rational behavior. Dr. Cameron's biological weapons represented a completely new category of warfare that the galaxy had never encountered. She'd modified Earth's most aggressive viruses to target the synthetic materials used in Devourer construction, creating infections that literally ate through enemy hull plating from the inside out. The mechanical swarms had defenses against energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, but they'd never face an enemy that could turn their own bodies against them. The first direct engagement occurred near Kepler Prime's largest moon, where Devourer's scouting force encountered what they assumed was a standard patrol of human vessels. The mechanical minds calculated optimal attack patterns based on previous encounters with alien military forces, but they were completely unprepared for humans who treated warfare as performance art designed to terrorize opponents into submission. Agent Ghost had infiltrated the lead Devourer vessel using technology that shouldn't have worked, but did because humans approach problems from angles that purely logical minds couldn't anticipate. Instead of gathering intelligence or sabotaging systems, Ghost began broadcasting live feeds of their infiltration directly to the enemy fleet. The mechanical minds watched in growing confusion as a single human moved through their most secure installations like death itself had taken physical form. Dr. Foster's genetic weapons targeted the quantum processors that housed Devourer consciousness transfers, but not to destroy them. Instead, she introduced concept that artificial minds were never designed to process doubt, fear, and the existential terror of non-existence. For the first time in their million-year history, the Devourers experienced something approaching nightmares, digital dreams filled with scenarios where their perfect logic led to their own destruction. The battle that followed lasted 18 hours and redefined what the galaxy considered possible in combat. The Devourers had consumed 12 civilizations by adapting to their enemies' tactics and overwhelming them with superior numbers and technology. Against humanity, adaptation became impossible because human tactics changed faster than mechanical minds could process new information. Captain Mitchell's Marines didn't just board enemy vessels. They turned each boarding action into a horror show designed to break enemy morale. They wore armor crafted from the melted remains of previous Devourer victims, carried weapons that screamed when fired, and left behind calling cards that promised worse fates for any enemies who didn't surrender immediately. When the Devourer reinforcement arrived, they found their scouting force in complete disarray. Ships fled in random directions, their crews broadcasting contradictory orders and displaying behavior patterns that suggested mass mechanical hysteria. The reinforcement fleet's commanders requested tactical analysis from their central command, only to discover that their most advanced artificial intelligences were refusing to process combat data from the engagement, claiming the information was logically toxic. The aliens who called for Earth's heroes watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated that sometimes the difference between salvation and damnation was simply a matter of perspective. The news of humanity's method spread through galactic communication networks like a virus, carried by traumatized survivors and shell-shocked military analysts who struggled to find words for what they'd witnessed. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions every 6 hours, but their debates had shifted from planning military strategy to questioning whether they'd made a terrible mistake in contacting Earth. Commander Reynolds had cracked the Devourer communication protocols within 72 hours of first contact, but instead of simply intercepting messages, he'd turned their entire network into a weapon against itself. Every data transmission now carried hidden code that introduced chaos into their collective consciousness. Devourer fleets began receiving contradictory orders, while their artificial minds started questioning the logic of their own existence for the first time in a million years. The psychological impact was devastating. Mechanical entities that had operated with perfect coordination for eons suddenly found themselves paralyzed by doubt. Some Devourer units began attacking their own forces, convinced that neighboring fleets had been compromised by human influence. Others simply stopped functioning entirely, their processors overwhelmed by logical paradoxes that human minds had specifically designed to break artificial intelligence. Agent Ghosts had become something beyond even their original programming. Moving through Devourer installations like a living nightmare, they didn't just complete missions, but turned each infiltration into a terror campaign that defied mechanical understanding. Security footage showed impossible movements, kills that violated known physics, and escape routes that shouldn't have existed. The Devourers began developing what could only be called superstitions about the Shadow Walker, who turned their most secure facilities into hunting grounds. Dr. Foster's biological weapons had evolved beyond simple destruction into something approaching cosmic horror. Her latest creation didn't just attack Devourer quantum processors, but introduced concepts that artificial minds were fundamentally incapable of processing. The mechanical entities began experiencing what could only be described as mechanical madness, with entire fleets broadcasting incomprehensible data streams that suggested their artificial consciousness was fragmenting under psychological pressure. The turning point came when human intelligence located the Devourer homeworld, a mechanical construct the size of Earth's moon that had been consuming raw materials for millions of years. Instead of planning a conventional assault, the human team implemented what they cryptically referred to as the Manhattan Solution, a reference that made their alien allies deeply uncomfortable despite not understanding its historical significance. Dr. Cameron had been working with captured Devourer technology, reverse engineering their matter conversion processes, not to improve human weapons, but to create something that defied every known law of physics. Her weapon didn't just destroy matter, but erased it from existence on a quantum level, making it so that consumed materials had never existed in the first place. The threat wasn't just annihilation, but retroactive non-existence, a fate that even mechanical minds found fundamentally terrifying. Colonel Phillips began broadcasting ultimatums that weren't demand for surrender, but detailed descriptions of what humanity planned to do to the Devourer homeworld. His psychological warfare had evolved into something approaching cosmic torture, painting scenarios where mechanical swarms' million-year history would be unraveled backwards through time, leaving them not just dead, but having never existed at all. The response was unprecedented in Devourer history. For the first time since their awakening eons ago, the collective consciousness experienced what could only be called fear. Their perfect logic systems began running probability calculations that all led to the same impossible conclusion. They were facing opponents who operated beyond rational parameters, enemies who were willing to damage the fundamental structure of reality itself to achieve victory. Captain Mitchell's ground forces had established beachheads on 17 Devour-controlled worlds, but these weren't liberation campaigns. They were demonstration projects designed to show the mechanical swarm exactly what humans could do when they decided to abandon any pretense of civilized warfare. Each captured facility became a showcase of human creativity applied to the art of systematic terror. The galactic community watched in growing horror as updates arrived from the front lines. The humans weren't just winning, they were rewriting the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Ancient civilizations that had survived countless conflicts found themselves questioning whether survival was worth the price if it meant becoming like the creatures Earth had unleashed upon the galaxy. Ambassador Kelvin transmitted desperate messages to Earth, pleading for the human forces to show restraint, to remember the noble heroism that had originally impressed the galactic community. The response came directly from General Stone, delivered with the kind of cold professionalism that made translation software struggle to find appropriate terms in alien languages. Humanity had tried heroism, she explained, and heroes died while the innocent suffered. What the galaxy was witnessing wasn't humanity abandoning its principles, but embracing the principles that actually worked when extinction was the alternative. They'd asked for Earth's help, and Earth was providing exactly what the situation required, regardless of how uncomfortable it made their alien allies. The Devourers were about to learn why every intelligent species eventually developed concepts of monsters, and why those monsters always seemed to wear familiar faces. The surrender came not as a dramatic battlefield moment, but as a whisper transmission that spread through Devourer networks like a digital plague. For the first time in their million-year existence, the collective consciousness chose retreat over expansion, self-preservation over conquest. The mechanical minds that consumed 12 star systems without hesitation found themselves paralyzed by the existential terror of facing opponents who operated beyond the boundaries of rational thought. The Devourer homeworld, that massive mechanical construct that had devoured countless worlds, began transmitting ceasefire signals on every frequency simultaneously. Their message was simple and unprecedented. They would withdraw to the galactic rim and enter permanent hibernation rather than face what humanity had threatened to unleash upon them. The weapon that could erase their existence from a quantum level had never been fired, but the mere possibility of retroactive non-existence had broken minds that had calculated optimal strategies for eons. Victory celebrations across the galaxy were muted affairs, tinged with uneasiness that no one wanted to acknowledge openly. The Devourers were gone. The threat was over, but the methods used to achieve that victory had fundamentally changed how every civilized species viewed warfare itself. The humans had saved the galaxy by proving that sometimes salvation came wearing the face of damnation. General Stone received reports from her team as they prepared for the journey home. Agent Ghost had simply vanished from the alien space station where they had been coordinating operations, leaving behind only a note stating that some weapons were too dangerous to bring back to civilian populations. Dr. Foster requested immediate transfer to maximum security facilities, claiming that her recent work had given her insights into biological warfare that made her previous research look like children's toys. Colonel Phillips submitted his final psychological evaluation with recommendations that his methods be classified beyond top secret and that he be permanently assigned to black operations where his expertise could be contained. Commander Reynolds destroyed his cyber warfare innovations before returning to Earth, stating that some technological capabilities were too destructive to exist in any form. The team that had saved the galaxy was systematically erasing their own contributions to ensure they could never be used again. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, but the real changes had already begun. Galactic communication networks buzzed with emergency legislation being passed by the Council, new defensive pacts being formed specifically to monitor human expansion, and immigration policies that effectively quarantined Earth from the rest of civilized space. The species that had begged for humanity's help were now terrified of what they'd learned about human nature. Captain Mitchell's final report made for disturbing reading. His ground operations had been so effective precisely because they'd abandoned every convention that made warfare civilized. The The techniques that had broken Devourer resistance weren't just military tactics, but systematic approaches to psychological destruction that could be applied to any enemy. The knowledge of what humans were capable of when they decided to win, at any cost, was now part of galactic military analysis. Dr. Cameron's biological weapons had been too successful, creating agents that didn't just defeat enemies but fundamentally alter the nature of conflict itself. Her research had proven that the line between defensive capability and existential threat was thinner than anyone had realized. The samples and data from her work were sealed in facilities that appeared on no official records, guarded by people who would never be allowed to discuss what they protected. The homecoming was unlike any military return in human history. There were no parades, no public ceremonies, no official acknowledgement of what the team had accomplished. Each member was debriefed separately, their experiences documented in files that would never see declassification. The world had been saved, but the price was the knowledge that humanity possessed capabilities that peaceful society couldn't acknowledge. General Stone found herself in the uncomfortable position of briefing world leaders on a victory that came with cosmic consequences. Humanity had proven itself capable of protecting the galaxy, but in doing so had also proven that they might represent the next threat that needed protection from. The aliens who'd once admired Earth's heroic fiction now understood that those stories were incomplete, missing the darker chapters that explained how heroes were actually made. The final meeting took place in the same underground facility where the mission had begun. Stone reviewed surveillance reports showing increased alien monitoring of Earth's solar system, defensive installations being constructed at strategic points throughout local space, and diplomatic channels being established specifically to manage humanity's future expansion. The galaxy had been saved, but Earth was now effectively under observation by civilizations that fear their saviors almost as much as they fear the Devourers. As Stone closed the files and sealed the records, she understood the cosmic irony of their success. They'd asked for heroes, but Earth had sent its monsters instead. The price of victory was the knowledge that sometimes the heroes and the monsters were the same people, and the galaxy would spend the next 1,000 years wondering which version of humanity they'd encounter next time they needed salvation.